Hello, Leapers, and welcome back to the Quantum Leap Podcast. I'm Albie, and with us today we have Sam from Fate's Wide Wheel. Hey, Sam.
Hello. Thank you so much for inviting me along. I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you for being part of this. This is really special. We have the director of One Night in Koreatown. We have Tamika Miller. How you doing, Tamika?
Great. Thanks for having me.
I am so excited to talk to you, and sorry about the short notice, and thank you for making time in your schedule for this. I'm going to spoil it right here. This is my favorite episode of the new series so far. So it's really a treat to get to speak with you. But before we get to talk about One Night in Koreatown, which I'm sure both of us have a lot of questions, I wanted to get an idea, a sense of who you are. How did you, what was that first time in your life when you thought, I think I want to be a director?
Wow. Well, before I answer that question, I'm curious, why is this your favorite episode so far in the sequel of this series?
I think it has, for me, it has a lot to do with the series always has a lot of heart, and that's like my favorite part of it. And I think Ernie Hudson just knocked it out of the park in this episode, and his storyline, and of course having to deal with the LA riots and stuff, and his trauma, and then his past, and then of course being with Beth and all that stuff together. But mostly it was the story and Ernie Hudson, and your directing just brought me right into the story. Like I didn't feel like I was watching a TV show. I felt like I was really there. So it gave me that feeling of like heart and hope, and there was some, a little bit of sadness, and but it was just a really good adventure. And it reminded me more of the original series than any episode previously.
Oh, wonderful. Wow. Well, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we can just end the interview right there.
All right, we're good. We're good. Yeah, like I always wanted to, be a filmmaker, and I make little things. I make YouTube videos and different things, and I want to, I study shots. I listen to directors' commentaries. I do all that stuff. What gave you the bug of wanting to be a filmmaker?
Well, I think I was always a storyteller from a very young age. Actually, my mom is an old movie buff, if you will. So I grew up watching, old MGM musicals, Westerns. And it was just something my mom really loved to watch. So whenever she wanted me to just sort of sit and not move as a kid, she would put me in front of, The King and I, or Showboat. So I have a love of musical theater, as well as theater and film and television. And ultimately, I'm a storyteller. I'm a director, writer. So, but it was definitely, looking back on it, shaped as a little girl, as a young girl.
I love musicals as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think my first musical was Damn Yankees. That's a good one. It's hard to pick my favorite though. Maybe Chicago right now. I'm not sure. We just saw Hairspray a few days ago at the local theater.
Oh, wonderful.
Did you notice yourself like as a young person, like watching the films differently than other people did? Like how it's done, how I would do this? Or did you just enjoy the art form and then decide you wanted to learn how to do that art?
I enjoyed the art form, as a storyteller. For me, I'm all about how something makes you feel, and as a young person, as a little girl, I was just swept away in the production design. I didn't know it was called production design then, but just bringing all the elements of production design and score and choreography, if there was one, and obviously acting together. I was always engaged and always affected, and so for me as a filmmaker today, I'm all about my audience feeling something, so when you say you felt something watching this episode of Quantum Leap, that's the biggest compliment I can ever get, is that you felt something. So yeah, so as a little girl, I wasn't so much looking at the technical because I didn't know enough about filmmaking at that time. But it was really more of like, wow, I really love this, and The King and I, just since I mentioned it, it's a love story, and even in my young mind, I felt something in that relationship, the relationship that was happening between those protagonists. But I will have to say, as I got older and went off to college, I actually thought I would be more of a suit, I'll say, more of a studio exec. Because I had sort of both sides of my brain working for me. I actually started out as an economics major in college,
Wow.
actually. And so I thought I would go on the business school, and so having come to the industry, getting my start in production. So on the other side, I ultimately worked my way up and line produced commercials before I transitioned into directing full time. And so when I say I have both sides of my brain working, I'm a storyteller, a director, writer, I'm a creative, but I'm also a producer. I also know numbers. I also know what it takes to execute a scene, financially. And so, but it was really early on, I would say, soon after college. And that I realized, I it wasn't so much I wanted to be a studio exec. I really wanted to be on the set and being an integral part of the creative and the execution. And here I am doing it.
Mm. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'm curious, especially having such a background in watching films and loving films. Who are some of your favorite filmmakers? And obviously the big names are great, but especially like anybody that might fly under the radar, that's just been inspiring to you in some way.
Wow. Some of my favorite filmmakers, I like Sam Mendes. Um, uh, Road to Perdition, in particular, is a film that um, I love. I really love Road to Perdition in particular because of the pacing. It's beautifully shot, obviously, but it's a film that really, I think, takes you on this journey, and it doesn't rush. You're not rushed. So so Sam Mendes comes to mind because he's the kind of filmmaker that typically tells story in such a way. I would say, one of my favorite films is actually Out of Africa. A bit of an epic film.
Yeah.
Sidney Pollack. I just think it's a masterful piece of work. I'm not an advocate for colonialism per se in terms of storytelling, but in terms of just the execution, I think he did a phenomenal job. I've seen Goodfellas. I have to drop Scorsese. I've seen Goodfellas. I don't know how. I think a lot of us have seen it, no less than 20 times.
Absolutely.
The Godfather. So anyway, I can go on and on. I mean, but it's really, there are films, and then obviously there are the directors and filmmakers. And each director for me speaks to a certain thing. So for example, I can look at someone like Spielberg and like, whoa, the attention to detail. I'm a director, I direct television, but I also direct film and I direct commercials. And as a filmmaker, I'm all about the details as well. So I watch films with that kind of eye, today, in terms of, really noticing the production design as well as camera movement, obviously, and execution. Yeah, I know I've said a lot. I've answered.
No, that's good. I love that answer. I mean, speaking of shots, I mean, there's a shot in the episode in particular, which I think is pretty standout, just because the episode itself is very claustrophobic for the most part, and there's very few times that we get out into the world. And the shot, which is, I mean, you can look at newsreel footage from the time, and it's absolute. The veracity of it is perfect. Seeing the, you know, Korean American men standing on top of the movie marquee with their guns, and the way that shot just really opens the world up in this way. And, you know, it's and with Ben's POV looking up, it's just it's stuff like that is wonderful. And it's those moments where you know, yeah, you kind of get to step outside of some of that. And you know, and obviously the detail of everything in the shoe store, and those other moments, but stuff like that I really appreciated. And I was just kind of curious as to I know, having gotten the opportunity to speak with Derek and Ben, I know that was something that was in the script that they really wanted to show. But when it comes to constructing that and actually filming that, I'd be very curious as to know kind of what went into that. What was the thought process behind it?
Well, you know, it all starts on the page, right? So, you know, Derek and Ben wrote a phenomenal script, you know, and I have to admit that when I first got the script and I read it, and, you know, I did a bit of a fist pump, like, you know,
Yeah.
like I literally did a fist pump because, you know, coming into, you know, a television show series, you know, I have no control over what script I'm going to receive.
Sure.
And, you know, some are better than others. So to get this script of a subject that was really sort of more recent history, and that was so charged, and I felt really lucky to want to get this script. And so, yes, that scene of the Korean store owners on the top of the marquee is written in the script. It's a line in the script, right?
Yeah.
And so, for me, you know, the execution of that is you know, doing my own research. You know, because it is recent history, we can find images and imagery of what that actually looked like in 1992.
Right.
And then, you know, it was important to me that scene have a feeling of grandness, you know, and, you know, we actually filmed that scene on the backlot of Universal Studios. So we weren't actually on location in Koreatown.
Right.
That would have been challenging in some ways because we really had to have command and control over 3 blocks of a you know, city area, city streets, which would have been hard to do. And so, you know, and so that moment, that scene, it was important to me that we clock, you know, Ben seeing them, and our Korean store owners on the top of marquee seeing Ben and acknowledging them. And so, you know, it's a crane shot, you know, it's meant to be shot just with some expansiveness, you know, because you're right, you know, the episode in many ways is pretty contained, you know. So yeah, hopefully that answers the question a little bit. But.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to ask about, I just finished watching The Christmas Lottery. I really loved it. I love Christmas movies, and I you know, you just nailed that one. That was pretty good. I really enjoyed it. I got all the feels at the end.
Oh my God, Albie, you're going like way back.
Yeah, I went down the IMDb and I started watching stuff. So, okay. But that's what I just got finished watching. I enjoyed it. And being like a feature film director and going to an established television show, like I've heard directors like Kevin Smith talk about how it's different doing a film versus going into like a machine in motion. So like, could you explain to us, because we're not directors and we're not on the set, what's the differences between like making a film like you do, or then coming into something where pretty much everybody knows what they're doing and they're just looking to you to be the leader, I think, right?
Right. Well, the difference is, you know, in episodic television, obviously as a director, I'm hired to come into a family, a house that is already there. There's a way that the house is run. There are, you know, the people who live in the house live there full time, and I'm just a guest, right? I'm sort of painting a picture, right? Creating an analogy. And so for me, it's really important to one, obviously know the show that I've been hired to direct. Typically, I will watch the episodes that have been shot previous to mine, meaning in that season, obviously, that have not been aired yet. And then, it's really, my job is to elevate what's on the page, what the writers, what Ben, in this case, Ben and Derek wrote on the page. And if there's any questions that I have, then I go to the writers, like, what did you mean here? This is how I interpret it here, and so the writers are always great resources. But I'm coming into a house that's already firing, right, on all cylinders. And so my job is to very quickly get up to speed, have a great command of the script, because no one, not even the writers, I think, will have as great a command of the script as I will have ultimately, as a director will have, because we're looking at it from all perspectives. It's not just the words on the page, it's production design, it's costumes. I'm thinking about shots, shot lists, how the camera's going to move. So I'm thinking of all these other elements to really help bring this episode to life in a world that already exists. Typically, however, Quantum Leap is special, that every week, every episode is a standalone episode, right? It's a different world. That's unheard of. And so in some ways, Quantum Leap is similar to me directing a film, because it's a world that had not existed previously. Yes, we get the current day, present day headquarters, our characters and their storylines and their arcs are happening. But, with Quantum Leap, I can be, 18th century Western, and here I am now in, early 90s, LA uprising, so Quantum Leap is very unique and very special for that reason. So I would say in this case, for me, it was most similar to directing a feature film, because I had a little bit more creative license and control to really help create what that world looks like, which is what I do when I'm directing a feature film. It's all me. Yes, there are other cooks in the kitchen potentially, studio, what have you, but there who have an opinion. But at the end of the day, it's really up to me to really help hone in on the details of that world. And so, so I would say in this case, yes, the short of it is this episode in particular is probably most similar to my directing, a feature film. And thank you for watching The Christmas Lottery.
Oh, I loved it. My mom had already seen it, and she said it was really good. So I was like, I should watch it.
Thank you. I enjoyed making that particular film. It was a lot of
fun. Can't go wrong with Reginald VelJohnson.
Man. Such working with such people like Reginald VelJohnson and Ernie Hudson. What is that like? Just like people that you've seen on your screen and like are icons of the industry, and you get to work with them.
Wow. That it's wonderful. I mean, it's like, these men are legends. They're so recognizable and legends. And they could not be more nice. They are so nice. Ernie is such a sweetheart. And throughout my prep process, I like to talk to the actors if I'm able to before we film and introduce myself, without a mask on set, or, just introduce myself and also ask them, how do they like to work, as actors? How can I be supportive of them in doing what they do? And so I got to talk to Ernie, of course, before filming, and we just had such a great conversation and dialogue, and talking about this script in this episode, because he is so featured in this episode, and we really get we really see Magic in a way we've not seen him before, right?
Yeah.
And Ernie was so open and talking about his own personal experience and what he had experienced, in the 60s, late 60s. And so there were these commonalities, or these parallels, I should say, between Ernie Hudson, the man, and Magic, the character. So yeah, it was great working with Ernie on this episode, to say the least, and the entire cast, really all the way around, lovely cast, But yeah, Ernie's an OG and a legend, so that was extra sweet.
Now, I had heard that Ernie was actually in Detroit, during that time period.
Yes.
And without, I'm certainly not asking you to gossip or betray any confidences or anything, but it was mentioned to me that, yeah, the two of you did have a conversation, especially about that scene between Magic and Jen when Magic, tells that story. And I'm really kind of curious what kind of dialogue, you create with the actor in that moment. And that, especially when something like that comes up, that he was actually there. Because that was something that, when I spoke with Ben and Derek, nobody knew. Like, nobody was like, oh, Ernie was there, we can go to him. That they found that out in the course of the making of the episode. So I'm very curious what that dialogue was like with him and preparing for that scene, and kind of, uncovering that fact that he had that experience, if not the exact experience that Magic had, but he had been there.
Yeah, I mean, that was something I learned just in my conversation with Ernie, and look, Ernie, while he's, a recognizable face, and, he's a Black man in America, and yes, he did have his own personal experiences, having been in Detroit in the late 60s. And so he knew very much what Magic was going through. I mean, he really connected with where Magic is in this moment, in the series, and in this episode, and around race relations in particular. And so, yeah, I mean, I wish Ernie could be on here to talk personally about his own experience. So I won't do that, but yes, he did have a personal connection, and he said to me that, after the Detroit riots in 67, Detroit was never the same.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways LA was never the same, I think, in some ways. Although I will have to say, I got to LA a few years after 1992, but like, I think everyone, we were all watching what was unfolding in LA. And, and I grew up in Miami, Florida, so a major city. And I think in some ways, in these other major cities, there were things happening that those cities, really connected to LA. They were similar to what was happening in LA. So, but yeah, Ernie definitely had his own experiences and could bring that obviously to Magic. And that scene with him and Jen, oh my God, like, it is such a powerful scene. Such a powerful scene. I have two favorite scenes in this particular episode, and that is one of my two favorite scenes. Yeah.
I definitely want to know what the other one is, but before I get there, you mentioned, and this is a question that I had asked Ben and Derek as well. You mentioned not being in LA at the time of the uprising, and I'm very curious to bring your context to the history of the episode and the situation. What was your perspective at the time that these events were occurring in April and May of 1992? And was there an awareness that you had before the verdict came down? Obviously one of the things that unfortunately I think it's more people are more knowledgeable about it now than maybe they were 10 or 15 years ago. But like the Latasha Harlins murder, for instance, that occurred prior to the verdict coming in, and just the tensions that were already existing, surrounding the events of the Rodney King beating and going forward. So I'm curious what your own experience with those events was, and what your perspective on those things was like at the time that this was happening.
Well, in the early 90s, I was a young teenager. I knew what was happening in the world, definitely in the country. And so I definitely remember, we all remember the Rodney King beating in itself, and the Latasha Harlins murder happened about 2 weeks after Rodney King's beating, actually. What we show in this episode is a year after that, right? It's 1992. It's now the verdict of the Rodney King beating that ignites this LA uprising, if you will. And, I think for me as a young Black girl, I was pretty astute, actually. And even at a young age, I actually thought I was a storyteller, but I was very, very knowledgeable about politics. I thought, in fact, when I went away to college, I was a double major. I was political science and economics. So that gives you a sense of, where my interests lie. And so this, what was happening in our country in terms of race relations was very much something that was at the forefront of my mind in many ways. And so, while I wasn't living in Los Angeles, Miami had its own, its own uprisings, growing up. So there definitely was a connection, and then, to bring us forward to this year, 2023, and the making of this particular episode, I say that I'm lucky to have gotten the script and be able to tell this story now, because I think, for me as a Black woman director, having a direct, lived, embodied experience, as a person of color coming to helm an episode like this, I think makes all the difference in the world in how an episode like this is executed, and in terms of what I'm paying attention to, I think I bring a more like multidimensional perspective, a more humanizing perspective of who we are as people of color, as Black people in particular, because this, there was a lot of tension between the Korean community and Black community at that time. And it continues to this day to some extent.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, so the short answer to your question is I was definitely having my own lived experience at that time and being old enough to be affected by it. And then cutting to today, it was so important to me that I really stay true to who I think these characters are and what was happening at this time. And also that magic, is unafraid, if you will, to show his own sort of vulnerability in the telling of what happened to him. And then just also see his sensitivity to Dwayne, what's happening with Dwayne, in this episode, the young African-American brother in the episode who himself is a target,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me, and I don't know if it's my place to draw any kind of parallel whatsoever, but I recently I've been reading the new Tupac Shakur biography, and Stacey Robinson's brilliantly written, and she writes a lot about Afeni in the beginning of the book, and about how Tupac's mother, at a very young age, had to get engaged politically. Do you feel that tends to be true for a person of color, that there is this level of engagement? There's almost like a pressure, or that if you don't get engaged, that it could be to your detriment?
No, I don't think that that's a sort of a normal or typical thing.
Yeah.
I would say that I am more politically engaged than my mother.
Sure.
Yeah. I exponentially so. so that I can't make that comparison to Tupac Shakur and his mother, right? Because his mother
sure.
was very, very politicized, very aware, so yeah, no, I don't think that that's. I think that as a Black person, I think Black children, as soon as they leave the comforts of their home, as soon as they walk out that door for the first time and walk into a space where their parents aren't with them, i.e. schools, whether it's, preschool or, daycare, whatever that looks like, there's a socialization that happens. There are things that happens to young Black children in the way that we were treated, and not really understanding and knowing, what it meant. But, as an adult, as someone older now, I can look back at a time and say, oh, that wasn't right what that teacher did or said, right? And so, but yeah, to answer your question, no, I don't think it's an automatic, we need to really be engaged in politics. But there is a survival code, for sure. There is a teaching, a learning of, okay, how do we survive in this place where there can be microaggressions coming at us as soon as we walk out our doors as babies, really.
Well, that's one of the things too that's really striking about that scene between Magic and Jen. I mean, Magic in essence says exactly what you just said. As a child, like, you're prepared. You're told. And this is how you have to act. And if the police stop you, and that sort of thing. One of the things that the episode does so well is it offers us some incredible context. Obviously, reaching back to Detroit in '67, or the long hot summer in general, but specifically Detroit. And then, of course, taking place in LA in '92. But I think it's impossible for a viewer in 2023 to also not be able to further contextualize that in the wake of Black Lives Matter and the George Floyd protests. Was that at all on your mind during the making of this episode, that you have these three distinct periods of time and very recent history, as well as this not so far removed history, and then this further back history, that this episode is far too relevant in so many ways, and what that context might mean for you as a director?
Yeah, I mean, it's yes. I mean, obviously, this episode, this subject matter, is very much connected to what we all witnessed in the last few years around the Black Lives Movement. And or we've seen in old, 1960s footage of the Civil Rights Movement, right?
Yeah.
So these movements, there's a commonality, and really the goal, if you will, is the same. The goal is to be seen. The goal is inclusivity. The goal is equity. So yeah, coming into this episode, I can draw on really recent history, obviously, in terms of Black Lives Movement. But 1992 was, like I said, it wasn't so long ago, so I can go right to that place, and so I look, I also, in my own preparation, I was looking at different documentary footage, reading different things, to really just sort of help, jog my memory of like, okay, this is what was happening during this time. But yeah, they're all connected. We have a ways to go in this country, for sure. To sort of eradicate, racism, if you will. So yeah.
Well, it's striking too, because there's a line that Ernie has during that moment, which is just brilliant, and I love it so much. Is that the sparks of injustice may vary, but systemic oppression will always light the fuse, and no matter how much progress we make, that will never change. And that fear, and it's worth noting that Deborah Pratt penned an episode for the original series, Black on White on Fire, which takes place during the Watts riots, and she wrote that originally actually as a stage play that had nothing to do with Quantum Leap, and then transferred it over to an episode of the show. And that episode was produced in 1990. So even before LA. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that Quantum Leap, does well is to contextualize some of those events sometimes. And unfortunately, as we find ourselves repeating, it is hard and it has to be frustrating. And to see the parallels between Dwayne and Magic, and Dwayne's frustration over Jen's persecution just finally bubbling out. Whereas Magic, there's like this, it's very different for him. We've never seen this before. There's like defeat, he feels almost hopeless. And it's like these traumas upon traumas upon traumas, and being triggered by the events that he sees, and Dwayne having to hide under the trash can. When coming to those moments, I mean, obviously, like you said, you want people to feel things. You can't necessarily direct for mood or for feeling, right? But you're telling a story. But I am curious, like the choice to show that, Dwayne underneath the garbage can, and the way that it's done, it was very powerful for me. It was very affecting for me, seeing it from that perspective. And I'm not sure exactly what my question is here. It's a very powerful episode, but I'm curious, kind of when approaching these situations that unfortunately still feel very present. Like you said, we have a long way to go. And I remember as a 10-year-old child watching these events unfold. I was living in the suburb of St. Louis, and there was a little unrest in St. Louis, after the fact as well. Not to mention, of course, what would happen decades later, but watching these things unfold. And at the time, as a 10-year-old white kid in Midwestern suburbia, I was like, I thought we fixed this, like I thought we fixed this. And as I'm watching this and realizing no, and now of course having a very different perspective, approaching this, I'm just wondering what level of sensitivity and what level of perhaps even anger or emotion you can't help but have, approaching shooting some of these scenes.
Well, I never feel angry. I'm hired to do a job, right? First and foremost. And, like I said, I definitely come to this space, having this sort of direct lived embodied experience, right? That is for which I can connect to these characters in a way that you might not be able to, right? As a director, as if you were directing the episode. And so, I think you feel something because I've humanized the characters. You know what I mean? I think that, and this goes to another sort of question of, does it matter that Spike Lee directed Malcolm X, right? Could Spielberg have directed Malcolm X? Both would have done a great job. But the fact that Spike Lee is a Black male director directing a story about a Black man and that Black man's plight, and probably has some similar journey makes all the difference in the world. So for me, as a Black woman coming to tell this particular story, you know, I want to make sure that the characters, all the characters, but definitely the Black characters as well as the Asian characters, or you know, the Latina character, that they're humanized, that there's a humanizing that happens, because a lot of times with other people at the helm, you know, when we're telling the story through another lens, that doesn't always come across because it's not as important, in my opinion. And so, you know, just like it's not as important in terms of the media, I think definitely during this time in the early 90s, you know, the media you know, the stories are told through the lens of the dominant culture, which is white. You know, imagine had the news footage, newscast been told from the lens of the Korean American or the Black American, you know, for the world to see, you know what I mean? Not just in their communities. Just imagine that, right? And so for me, coming to this script and coming to this storytelling, it's important to me that you as the audience member, you see yourself in Dwayne. When he's under that dumpster, like I was very intentional with that moment, because I could have had him laying on his stomach, sort of peering out under the dumpster, but it mattered to me to have him on his back. Mm-hmm. You know, like he's fighting for his life. Like he just needs to get down, you know, and he's on his back and he's out of breath and he's, I mean, look, it's a 1 hour drama, 43 minutes of television, but in that moment, I'm thinking about what is this young man feeling and experiencing, I'm sure, in that moment of panic, his eyes are closed. He's breathing heavy. He's probably looking up at the sky because he's outside. It's at night. He's probably, he could be in prayer, like, don't let me get caught by these cops, So for me, if you felt something, then that means that I've humanized, me and the writing, but in how I'm showing it is all about me humanizing these characters. So you see them as human beings first and foremost, not a Black young man first and foremost, right, but as a human being foremost. And that's the thing that I think we connect with, that's the heart speak, that's when we're able to see ourselves and others.
I think you absolutely nailed that in that part, because I was right there with Dwayne under that dumpster hiding with him. And I felt that fear. And it's not something that in my everyday life I feel, because I was just born the way I was and the world is the way it is. And I don't experience that. But for that moment I did. And I was so affected by it, just thinking of, oh my goodness, for so many people in the world, how horrible it is just to be. And I think it really conveyed that to me and the audience. I really think so. So great job. I think what's a big difference about Quantum Leap today and say 30 years ago is there's a much greater thought process of having the right persons do the right stories, the right storytellers tell the right stories. Do you find that that's in your career, it's more like that everywhere, or is like Quantum Leap an exception to where they actually care about who's behind the camera as well as who's in front of the camera?
I don't think all shows are built the same, so I think that Quantum Leap, clearly is more conscious of who they hire as directors, and having more inclusivity, which makes sense. You're telling stories where, your cast is primarily people of color, and so it makes perfect sense that you would bring, directors who happen to be people of color and women and, queer and, all of those things. Like, that's just, to me, good management. You know what I mean? It's just, I don't know how else to put it. So, because that's where you're going to get the best storytelling, right? I think, in my opinion, you're going to get the best storytelling and execution when you have different perspectives and not one kind of perspective, white male perspective, which television has been for a long time, and television still is to a great extent. And, unfortunately, and so I think, Quantum Leap is from what I see so far, is definitely one of those shows that is very mindful of who they're bringing into the house, because inside the house, you have, an ensemble cast where, 2 are Asian American actors, you have a gender non-conforming actor, you have an African American actor, as all sort of co-leads, if you will. So, it's but not all shows are built the same. Not all shows care about that as much. But what do you do?
I wanted to ask a little bit about Black on White on Fire. That was such an amazing episode in the original run of Quantum Leap, one of the best episodes. And this episode was going to be compared to it, no matter what you did, because it had to do with riots and things. What did you feel any pressure going into this episode, knowing how greatly loved a similar story was in the original series?
No. Not at all.
Okay, cool.
I mean, I didn't feel any pressure at all. Yeah, I'm not so concerned about, I'm someone definitely who does my homework and who prepares. I am all about preparation, but I also am a director, a storyteller who believes in my own voice and believes that I can come up with a way to execute the story in a way that is engaging, that it can stand on its own and not be compared to anything else, or if it is, and that's a compliment, then great, but no, I didn't feel any pressure at all. The only pressure I had was, is that I didn't have a lot of days to shoot the episode. So it was just really the pressure of just, time of like, okay, we only have this amount of time to shoot this episode. And there's a lot happening in this episode. So, but other than that, no, creatively, I wasn't feeling any pressure from anyone. And Deborah's lovely. Deborah was on set and sitting behind me in Video Village, here and there, and she was she's such a sweetheart and really a fan, and so I'm so honored. I was so honored to get to tell this story, and so if it's compared to her episode, then hey, I'll take it.
I have a few just comments, questions. A couple of the shots that I really liked in the episode that weren't too heavy necessarily, like was when there was that moment of levity when Jen said, "When did you learn to speak Korean?" After that whole Korean scene. Was it hard to have that moment of levity in all this heaviness around there?
No. No. I mean, you know, it's so wonderful when I get to work with a great cast, you know what I mean? And C.S. Lee, who plays Jin Park, the store owner, you know, such a great guy, so open, so wanting to, you know, it's like, Tamika, what, you know, what do you need? You know, he's wanting to give his best performance, and he's, you know, he's great at what he does. You know what I mean? He makes me look good. You know, and so, but that moment in particular, you know, it's interesting. We did a few takes of that, and you know, there were a couple of ways that moment could have been done, you know, in terms of Jen's performance. You know, what you see in the episode, I just felt that it was the funniest, you know, because there's another way where Jen could have been more subdued, like, what when did you learn Korean? I mean, it still would have had some levity, right? But Jen is a passionate character, you know, from my perspective. And we see, you know, we see these Jen, we see so many emotions from him in this episode, right? But I just think that moment, you know, with his fire and his being charged, it was just appropriate that his delivery of that line be that way, you know. And but yeah, you know, it was an episode that definitely had, you know, a lot of drama, but it was an episode, and this, my hat's off to the writers. You know, an episode like this, you have to have these moments of levity, you know, and such is life. Right? I mean, there are these moments where someone just laughs, even at the most, you know, sad thing that could have happened, you know, and so, but thank you for pointing that out, that particular moment. But it wasn't challenging or difficult. It was an invited moment, obviously, I think, because it's like, oh, this is funny. And we were all laughing in Video Village. So
that's awesome. A couple just comments. I loved a couple of the shots that were so short, but they meant a lot. One was the handhold between Magic and Jen. I really like that. And that one shot of just Ernie touching the glasses, you know, it just said so much in so few frames. Do you know that going into it? Do you see that in your mind before you're going to film that might be that important and that short and just perfect?
Well, you know, it's interesting because Magic's office on the set, I remember walking to his office for the first time, and there's not a lot of things in the office that Ernie could use as for business, you know, like in acting, the business of like, you know, there, you know, and so I was sort of, given what the moment was, like that was just something that came up, like it was there. I say, oh no, I say, you know, do this. I told Ernie to do, you know, just rub your hand. You know, he's not gonna, you know, I didn't want him like pick up a glass and look at, you know, that would be too, like, you know, but, you know, he's pacing in the room. He's feeling something. And so and we know that this is a struggle, you know, potentially taking a drink, potentially. So, and so that was something in my being in the space. I say, yeah, just do that. You know, something as simple as rubbing your fingers on those glasses. That's all I needed, right? Because we knew the rest. That's the audience.
It was amazing just how much it told in that few short seconds.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
I wanted to ask about fan favorite Susan Dial coming back as Beth and introducing the relationship with Magic and Beth. What was that whole filming that whole part out? And also, was there any anything that else that was shot of their storyline or other storylines that might have been cut out of the final cut?
Well, to start with the final question, work my way backwards. No, I think everything I shot is in the episode. Um, and then, well, Susan's lovely, who plays Beth. And they were great together, Beth and Ernie. There is, it's so strange because like I know the episode has aired, but but I'm so kind of conditioned to not give away any spoilers, right? So I'm like, I don't know how much I should say. I really enjoyed shooting their scene in the kitchen. I really enjoyed that scene. I think it's beautifully shot. The music, there's a lightness to it. Yeah, it is such a different scene from any other scene in the whole episode, right? Like where we go in this episode is like completely different world from that moment. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question, Albie.
Oh yeah, that was great. That was great. My final question thought is we spoke with Christina Castro a few weeks ago, and she's the one who edited this episode. And we were talking about how many like different versions there might be and little tiny cuts. Like working with Christina, going back and forth for your final cut. Was that a long process, or did you guys like get together pretty quickly on it?
Yeah, no, typically, and you may already know this, the way it works is that, after I'm done filming, I don't know, a few days later, I will get an assembly from my editor. So I will get, so from Christina, I got what she put together, probably a week later or so. And then I have about 4 days to work with Christina and really hone in on my director's cut, and tweak and take, there might be a take that she thought, was the better take, but then I may think differently, and so, and typically on set, in terms of my favorite takes, the script supervisor is noting that anyway, but things change, when you're looking at an episode from beginning to end, what I thought was the better take on set, there might be another take that actually works better in that moment when looking at the full context, right, of the episode. And so, but yeah, I mean, Christina and we worked wonderfully together. I don't think I came in and I did what I needed to do, but I think the episode, my director's cut, and what we delivered is pretty much what you see, what was airing, what aired, what aired, So yeah, it was a great process. It was such a pleasure for me to get to work with Christina. It's my first time working with her. It might have been her, I don't know if it was her first or second Quantum Leap episode as an editor, but sort of a newer editor to the show. But it was a very smooth process. Very smooth process. Everything was there, right? So it'd be one thing if we didn't have the elements to put in there, but I managed to shoot everything we needed to make everything work. And so, but my hat's off to Christina because, editors are special, they're able to make magic in those editing rooms. And I think we did a great job on this one.
Agreed.
Thank you.
Yeah, I completely agree. I want to jump back just briefly to Susan and the inclusion of Beth. The moment between Magic and Beth in Magic's office is pretty powerful for a number of reasons. And I love the fact that as a recovering alcoholic myself, there are moments in the episode that are very easily identifiable. And I sit at 4 years, 2 months, and 5 days of sobriety right now. one of the things that I love about this episode, and I talked with Ben and Derek about this, is the fact that we learned that Beth and Magic have been together for a year, 365 days, but Magic's only been sober for 353 days. And I just love that. I really appreciated that. And in the scene between the two of them in Magic's office, especially as a viewer and lover of the classic series, someone who's done a podcast on Quantum Leap for 6 years now, there was a palpable sense that as Beth is talking to Magic about all of this, that it is not just the scene she's playing. She is playing the weight of Al and Sam and everything that came before, and Al's own issues with alcoholism. In packing a scene like that, I mean, I know that obviously the actors got to do it, right? But in putting that subtext in and doing that and creating that moment, I really would love to know what those conversations were like, and you know, what you got from it too, you know, as the director, and seeing what Susan was doing and just kind of being like, you know, there's more to all of this.
Yeah, that's wow, very, very astute line of questioning, because clearly you're a fan of the show, right? Because that scene, you're absolutely right. You know, Beth is bringing to that moment in this storytelling all of this history, all of this, these past feelings and experiences that she had with Al. And when Susan, when we did the scene, I'll give you a little insider info. When we did the scene, what you see in the final episode in terms of Susan's performance is not what Susan did instinctively initially, you know. And I went to Susan, and I really knew that the scene called for Beth to really get to a place that that we don't see Beth at typically, right? Yeah. You know, she's a little bit more mild-mannered, you know, as a character. And so I went to Susan. I was like, no, I just kept pushing Susan. I was like, I like, you know, if I'm going to use, you know, sure, angry, but it's not angry. It's fear. It's someone who's afraid, who's really afraid of what is happening, what might happen, what, you know, like, she's gone through this before, and she loves Magic. She doesn't want this to happen again. And so I really wanted you, the audience, to feel in that moment what Beth is wrestling with, you know? And so I really worked with Susan in that scene to get her to a place where Magic really felt, you know, her own fear, you know, so much so that he could lose her, you know what I mean? And so that was a scene where, you know, Susan and I spoke to Susan, and I was like, I want you to really go there. You know, don't just come into that office and confront him. Yeah, I found this, No, like, I want you to come in more hot, you know? Yeah. And so I appreciate you mentioning that scene, because it was a scene that I felt as a director, it was important for me to push the actress a little more. You know, we can always bring it in. We all, you know, we have different versions of it, right? Give me all the versions. All of it's good. No, there's no bad version of it, but give me this as well. You know what I mean? And I think Susan did a remarkable job, and she's so lovely to work with. So.
Yeah, it's a standout moment. And one of the things too about the episode that I really appreciated is, of course, and earlier we were talking a lot about history and context and that sort of stuff, which is important to me. And I think it's one of the great things that, as Deborah always says, it's got to have those 4 H's, right? And one of those H's is history. And so I think that that's important. However, to me, and this is obviously my own personal engagement with it, I cannot help but be, touched by Magic's story throughout the episode. And I feel like one of the things that the last couple of episodes of Quantum Leap, the revival, has done is find these beautiful ways to intertwine the project stories and the Leap stories. Before we usually got wonderful parallels, or we got to see what the project was working on to aid Ben with. But this season, and especially these last 2 episodes, the stories are one and the same. You can't separate them. And Magic is in a lot of ways is kind of the vessel for that. And it's really beautifully done. But of course, the story with his issues with alcoholism, there's 2 other scenes that are really worth mentioning, in my opinion. And one is, of course, when he admits to Ben that he's an alcoholic. And this is sort of a 2-part question. One, were you aware, and what was it like collaborating with Raymond Lee, knowing that this was an episode that he had kind of pitched during the first season, that he was like, I want this story to be told. And 2, that moment where, and it's beautiful because we're just on Ben's face. Ben has this inhale, when Magic tells him an alcoholic, and you can just see as though that admission is like this vapor hanging in the air, and Ben chooses to take it on and take the weight of that on and shoulder that because it's, I chose to leave. So yeah, I'm very curious about collaborating with Ray because he's phenomenal. And I just think that the work he's done this season in particular is a cut above anything you normally see on network television, as far as I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. And so that moment is just so special. And the chemistry between the 2 of them is beautiful. But yeah, I'm curious about that moment and collaborating with Ray in general in this episode.
Well, I mean, you said it. I mean, Ray is phenomenal. He's a really great actor, and just a lovely spirit. You know what I mean? Like, he's just a really beautiful human being, who's down to do whatever. like okay, and so yeah, that's a really beautiful moment. That scene, and my hat's off to Ray, to your point, because he really does such a great job. Yes, he's shouldering the responsibility. He's letting Magic know, like, this isn't your fault. Like, this was my choice. It was my choice to leave. This is my journey, and there's such a love that these 2 characters have for each other, love and respect, that is, I think, so clear in that particular scene, that moment, that, there's forgiveness, in the sense of, I think for Ben is saying to Magic, forgive yourself, Yeah. And it's really, I give props to the actors. Yes, I come in and I have a thought, but they live these characters day in and day out, season after season. And so for me as a director, I think I'm, smart enough to also lean into them.
Sure.
To lean into them and let them do what they do, but that was a scene I felt that really came fairly organic. Like there weren't many, if any, adjustments that I made as a director. So it's all Ray and Ernie. It really is, for me, it's about making sure I'm recording, you know, you know, but yeah, but I can't even remember if I had any, any adjustments there, you know. They just nailed it. They just nailed it. I wish I had more to say. They nailed it. Yeah.
I think that that's really lovely, actually, and I love that, and it speaks to, again, that sense of collaboration on a project like this. I mean, yeah, you come in, you're the director, you have to kind of tie everything together and see it from all these different angles, but at the end of the day, you also have to rely on, you know, this person that's, you know, that's lighting this particular scene, and this person that's, you know, and the actors and the writer, and so I love that. I mean, the collaborative spirit of it all is one of the things that I think I appreciate the most. You know, I mean, yes, I love just watching the show, but outside of that, you know, that sense of collaboration, of working together, of coming together, I mean, that's what it should all be about, not just making TV, but life.
Yeah. And I'll just add this one last thing. So this, you know, one thing that as a filmmaker, as a storyteller, you always, like, reaction shots are so key, right? It's not just about getting your coverage and coming up with cool shots. It's the reaction shot. So what you're speaking about in that scene also is Ben's reaction, because his back is turned to Magic. When Magic says, you know, I'm an alcoholic, you know, the camera is in front of Ben, but Magic is over his shoulder in that particular scene. And so, you know, we're focused on Ben's reaction, you know, more so in that moment. And, you know, Ray, again, just does what he does so brilliantly. And, you know, and if there were any, I don't even think I had to give this adjustment because he just knows instinctively. I'm about taking that moment. Don't rush it. Have the reaction. Take it in. Don't be like, you know, you don't need to. Take it in. What do you know what I mean? Before you make that turn and you're facing Magic. So reaction shots. Always get a reaction shot. Directing 101.
Well, it's you know, in that scene between Magic and Jen, I think similarly there's some beautiful shots of Nanrissa, of Jen reacting to what's being said that take that moment even further, you know, because it's enough to just hear Magic and Ernie say these things, but when you see her reaction, Last thing that I wanted to mention is I love the way the episode ends. I love the fact that we come back to Magic and Ernie, you know, getting on the elevator, and we have that moment with him making the call to Beth. One of the things that I love about the portrayal of Magic throughout the course of this episode is that there's no fear, it seems, from the writers, from you as the director, from the actor especially, of allowing Magic to appear vulnerable and in need. And I know sometimes, just with a lifetime's worth of viewing television, that can be hard to do with your principal characters, you know, that we don't like to see that sometimes, and how awful that is, because it should be normalized. And for me, it was an incredibly touching and powerful moment, because he calls her to cancel that dinner and then follows that up with asking her to come to a meeting with him. Mm-hmm. Again, I mean, it was a moving moment for me. And I would love to know a little bit about that moment, because again, I feel like it's just very honest and raw and truthful, and that there's not a lot, you know, even the camera work, even, you know what I mean? It's just like, just let it happen.
Yeah. You know, it is a beautiful moment. Thank you for mentioning that moment. And just also thank you for just, you know, speaking to Ernie, seeing Ernie in a way that we don't typically get to see him, right? Which is like really vulnerable. And Ernie and I talked about that too, because there was definitely a discussion on how much of a, say, breakdown do we see Magic have, for example, when he's in the alleyway seeing Dwayne, right? We talked about that. You know, how much of a breakdown do we see? And I think we found that nice balance of like, we are able to see in Magic's face how affected he is without him, falling to the ground kind of thing. You know what I mean?
Yes. Right.
In despair. And so to your question about that last scene in the episode, Ernie's just a man, right? I mean, I had a specific way I wanted to shoot that shot, which is very simply, just having our camera a little up, sort of framing Ernie. How should I put it? Framing Ernie where we're really seeing more just his face. I don't really need to see his body, his torso, but just really more space and just pushing in ever so slightly, and we know that once that elevator closes, like that's a wrap, like that's the end of the episode. And we've just felt something in that moment, right? At least that's what my intention was. And so I just think, I think we probably did, I don't know, maybe 3 takes of that. Like 3 takes, and really it wasn't so much about performance. It was just like wanting to get the camera movement right, making sure the elevator door closed. It had to be right, like the elevator closing when it needed to close after that moment. So it was more technical stuff, that might have tripped us up here and there. But in terms of performance, Ernie was on it from the first take. He knew what the episode was about. He knows where his character is in this moment. We know and we believe, I think as the audience, we believe in the depth, I hope, of the relationship that he and Beth have are having. And I think that moment informs us,
absolutely,
of that depth.
Yeah, no, I thank you so much. I mean, it's a very beautiful episode, and there's some wonderful moments, and I love what it says about, shouldering the responsibility, but also forgiving yourself and being able to move on from certain traumas. And I think one of the things that the episode is so successful at is you feel the weight of the 3 years that have passed for our characters at the project in some wonderful ways, especially for Magic, obviously, but for Ian as well. Ian and Addison have that lovely scene, and that idea of forgiving yourself in order to move on. It's beautifully done. There's some wonderful stuff. And of course, obviously the history and the passion and everything that goes into the leap itself, which is wonderful. I really enjoyed it, and I thank you so much, and thank you, Albie, for letting me be here.
Oh, thank you for coming on, and thank you, Tamika, for joining us. It was amazing.
You. Great questions, you guys. I really appreciate the opportunity. Glad you loved the episode.
Loved it. Thank you.
All right.